see you.
Now we'll begin the press conference. Very good afternoon to all. So I have the great honor to welcome a delegation of parliamentarians from the European Parliament, and from Mexico, and from Lithuania. And we have with us Mr. Mykolas Peksa. He's accompanied by 4 members of European Parliament, and delegation has 11 members, including the representative Ms. Rinzin Genkang. And we have a fairly large delegation from Mexico, led by Mr. Salvador Caro Cabrera, and we have from Lithuania, Member of Parliament, Mr. Arūnas Valensikas. I welcome you all, the delegation, on behalf of the Department of Information and International Relations. So I would first request the head of the delegation to address the media for a short while, briefly, and after that we'll start with the questions and answer session. So I think it will take about half an hour. So we have the delegation from Mexico is accompanied by our representative, Mr. Jingmi Tsiring, and Mr. Valensikas is accompanied by Representative Mr. Sonam Tsiring Frasi. We'll request the members of press to identify yourself with your name and the media, the house where you belong, and keep your questions short and concise. So I would first request Mr. Mykolas Peksa to please address the media persons. And before that, I would introduce to you that we have in the media, in the floor, we have media from the Tibetan section, you know, like Tibetan medias, and then we have national media from our Indian brothers and sisters. So please, Mr. Mykolas Peksa. After that, Mr. Cabrera, and then Mr. Valensikas, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I'm one of the 4 members of the European Parliament who are part of the Tibet interest group within the European Parliament. We actually are members of different political forces. Effectively, all the democratic pro-European forces are somehow represented among us, namely the European People's Party, the Social Democrats, the Renew Europe, and the Greens. Over the last 2 or 3 days, we have been visiting Central Tibet administration as well as other Tibetan institutions to meet with the government in exile, the parliament in exile, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Overall, we have witnessed a very good cooperation of the Central Tibet administration, and also a very good care provided to all the Tibetans, all those living in India and also to the other countries. We have also witnessed very good signs of cooperation between Central Tibet administration and the host country, namely India. For us, the visit was very enlightening and showed us a lot of problems that are related to current situation of Tibet people, namely the problem caused by Chinese occupation, Chinese illegal occupation of Tibet, causing deprivation of freedom, democracy, fundamental rights, and religious freedom of the citizens. We have been discussing the corresponding issues with our hosts. The last visit of His Holiness was very enlightening for us. His Holiness provided very meaningful insights on various topics, speaking about friendship across the nations without differences in religions and ethnicities, as well as very important problems we do share on our planet, namely the global warming. His Holiness specifically warned about its impact. The visit was very enlightening for us, and we greatly appreciate the hospitality of our hosts.
Okay, Mr. Cabrera, please. I think I missed introducing that we have 13-member delegation from Mexico, including 9 members of parliament from Mexico, headed by Mr. Cabrera. Mr. Cabrera, please.
So maybe let me just check.
Good afternoon. It's a great honor to be here today. The Mexican Congress has 500 members. There are represented 7 parties. And we were encouraged last June by the Sikyong to make the friendship group in Mexican Congress. And then we have a group of 19 members from 5 of the out of the 7 parties, and now here we are visiting Dharamsala, 9 of the 19 members. It has been a great experience. Today we have the meeting with His Holiness, and it was very, very encouraging to hear him. That he was born in other life in Mexico, and that he can be reborn in next life in our country. You know, His Holiness is very, very beloved in our country. He, you know, what he told us today, he told once in our country in a presentation with 50,000 people. So, you know, Mexico recognized His Holiness as a peacemaker, as a leader in interreligious dialogue. We recognize him in a just and legitimate cause, the cause of Tibet, and that's why we are here. We are supporting this cause, and we are denouncing the malignancy of the politics of one China. You know, China causes suffering not only in Tibet. It's you know, the problems are all over the world. It has a neo-colonization politics in Latin America, in Africa, you know, many places, many places. In our country, mining is displacing people, original people, you know, indigenous people from the places. They are, like in Tibet, they are affecting the environment, forest, rivers. So it's the same problem all in the world. We are uniting our efforts with Tibetans to stop this. You know, when it is very different when, you know, Canadian company is, you know, doing the job of mining in our country, then a parliamentarian in that democracy denounce things, and, you know, things change. But in China, there won't be any parliamentarian defending anybody, because, you know, the criminal idea of one China just causes pain. The criminal idea of expanding of all over the world is causing suffering. So we must be conscious about that. And that's why we are here. We are very, very happy of the support that the Sikyong is giving to us the support of Mr. Jigme Sering, the representative of the Central Administration for Latin America, and the work of House of Tibet in Mexico. So, you know, there is a big team working in favor of stop the atrocities of China and his policy, and its policy of one China. That's what we want to share with you. All the members of the delegation are very, very happy to be here today, and we are very, very committed with, you know, the Tibetan cause. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cabrera. So I would request Mr. Valinskas to please address the media, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, let me begin by saying again that it is a pleasure and an honor to be here in Dharamsala in front of all of you. I'm Arūnas Valinskas. I'm a member of Parliament of Lithuania, and I'm a member of the Parliamentary Relations with Tibet group as well. It's truly fascinating to see what the Tibetan people in exile have done with organizing themselves and maintaining their democracy, because in Lithuania, you know, Parliament is one of the least trusted institutions, least liked institutions in the whole country, and sometimes it seems that we take many things for granted. While seeing how you have managed to organize yourselves to maintain this idea and to put it into practice despite all the difficulties is truly inspiring and truly something to take home. As I mentioned before, I'm a member of Parliamentary Relations with Tibet group, and it's one of many groups that exist in Lithuania that are supportive of the cause of Tibet, parliamentary, non-parliamentary, NGOs, so on and so forth. We have many intellectuals, some of them who have passed away, some of our greatest minds in Lithuania who have contributed greatly to having, you know, spreading the message of Tibet in Lithuania, and I would even say somewhat abroad. It sometimes might seem strange that countries that are as distant as ours have such an interesting connection, and that Lithuanians have such a, sometimes an obsession with Tibet. But if you think about it in a deeper way, it stops being strange, because, as I mentioned today in my speech, you know, our nations have gone through similar trials and tribulations. The culmination of our fight has been different, or now is different. I sincerely hope, and I would like to say no, that your struggle will eventually culminate again in freedom, as it has for us. And these kinds of trials, they change a nation. First of all, they forge it. They allow it to take very specific form, but in another way, it allows it to transcend itself. That's why, for example, if we take Ukraine, Lithuanians have no problem saying, I am Ukraine, I am Ukraine. Obviously, we're not. We don't speak the language. We have a different religion, a different denomination at least. We live in a different country, but we don't see a contradiction in that, because it's not about those things. It's not about cultural differences. It's not about religious differences. It's about being a victim of oppression. That's what makes us similar. That's why we Lithuanians can say we are Ukrainians. That's why we can say, I can say, sitting here today, that I am Tibetan. And in a way, coming here to Dharamsala, 6,000 kilometers away, is in a very interesting way also coming home. So this has been a very, very enlightening, very profound experience, and we have been shown, I believe, that I speak for all of us, nothing but great kindness and generosity by your people, despite the fact that you yourself have gone through great trials and tribulations, and seeing your spirit not broken but forged and strengthened by your experiences is something that is truly inspiring. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Valinskas. Now, as I said earlier, we'll have question and answer session with the media persons. Kindly please identify yourself with your name and media house where you belong. Keep your answer short and to the point, specific.
My name is Akhilesh and I represent the ANI, Asian News International. My question is, what are the international efforts for Tibet, and particularly, what are the efforts of your country for Tibetan suffering in Tibet?
Well, there are obviously certain limitations that we can do internationally. I mean, we'd all agree on that. But whenever there comes an issue with China, for example, well, the most recent example that comes to my mind that I could give is whenever there's a resolution regarding anything that's considered to be sort of an internally Chinese matter, for example, Uyghurs, right, or Hong Kong, Tibet is a topic that always comes up, and there are people in Parliament who always represent the line that, okay, this is a resolution on China and a specific problem, but we must, keep in mind the wider context, and we also always try to include Tibet and its cause as well, because it's part of a bigger picture. So one of the main ways that I believe that China hopes this Tibetan problem, from their perspective, will resolve itself, is that the world will simply get tired or it will forget eventually. That's one of the lines of our Lithuanian intellectual Leonidas Donskis, who said that that's just one of the ways in which China hopes that Tibet will simply move into history and then even into oblivion, essentially. And that's one of the main issues that we must remember, that we must maintain this line that no, Tibet is still there, the struggle is still going on, it's still important. We must keep mentioning it, we must keep reminding ourselves, others, and the world that the struggle is still going on and that we must be vigilant and supportive of it. So that would probably be my answer.
If I may continue as an example.
Yeah.
Shall we switch? Okay. So as an example, I may mention intervention of High Representative Mr. Borrell, who is effectively an equivalent of Foreign Minister of the European Union, on the topic of DNA sampling of Tibetans living under Chinese occupation. But of course, there is certainly a huge space for further steps. In the midterm perspective, what I would consider to be important is that the European Union appoints own representative for Tibet to actually give an opportunity for Tibetans to have clear like contact person within the European Union. And also what is certainly very much needed is clear position of the European Union on Chinese interfering in the religious matters, especially all the attempts to disrupt process of reincarnation of possible future reincarnation, for example, of His Holiness or other similar cases.
We are part of the system of parliamentarian diplomacy, and in that way, we're working to help Tibet in this way. Mexico must support the Tibet cause in the multilateral organizations. That's our job. That's why we are here. We are even worried about the possibility and the intention of China to try to influence the reincarnation process. We make today a declaration to express that we condemn any intent of China to try to be part of that process. The system, the religious institutionalization of Tibet must be respected in extreme. That's very, very important for the harmony of Tibet and the harmony in the world. That's what we think.
Hello, I'm Sunny Mahajan from Aapka Fest, Indian media.
Indian.
Hi, I am Sunny Mahajan from Aapka Festla Indian Media. So we want to know how do you see the interference of Chinese in reincarnation of His Holiness?
Well, we have a big problem, you know. It is very important, the release of the Panchen Lama. He's the youngest political prisoner in the world, and that's you know, it shows the intention and the size of the problem. So that's you know, one important matter in this process. I think all the world must attain this point. All the world must be carefully paying attention.
I may add, I think India, Europe, the US, everybody, all the democratic countries in this world shall recognize that the process of reincarnation of His Holiness is a religious matter, and on the secular terms there can be no interference coming from any governments, which means it shall be solely under the distinction of Central Tibet administration.
Yeah, I have very little to add to what Miklos has said, and it's a matter of wider principle of religious liberty and liberty and freedom of conscience, whether it's reincarnation or just the right of Tibetans to practice their religion, whichever way they prefer. Obviously, as long as you don't support the lines that we follow in the West. But religious liberty and freedom of conscience have very wide margins, and they must be respected. So I believe that it's important that we see this in a wider context of freedom of religion.
Do you think India is affected by a Chinese invasion in Tibet?
I cannot really speak on Chinese interference within India, but from our experience across Europe and other countries, African and so on, we have to state that Chinese state intentionally expands its influence by very illegitimate methods, hybrid methods, by means of spreading disinformation, by means of industrial espionage, by means of controlling of particular sectors of industry, or influencing the media, which we consider to be very dangerous. And for future, we certainly shall take measures within the European Union to prevent such influences on our economy and society. So my only recommendation to India would be to follow the example and prevent such malicious interferences in your society.
Again, just to add to what my colleague has said, I believe that it is important to understand one principle that for the world, for India and the rest of the countries, and it kind of relates to the question that was we had earlier, what countries or any country could do to support Tibet more. It's the issue of Tibet is part of a larger issue of China and its global influence. What must be avoided is the idea that we can support Tibet and at the same time pretend that expanding trade with China and just turning a blind eye on what it's doing and how it's trying to solve its domestic crisis, it's unrelated to that. No, Tibet is an integral part of it. If we want for this question to resolve itself, it inevitably will be a part of a resolution of the question of China in general, its influence and its ability to keep its shall we say empire going. And if on the one hand, I would say Tibet is important, it should be autonomous or free or be able to decide its own fate. And at the same time, we keep trading with China and helping it, to maintain its grip on Tibet. We keep giving it resources or finances to keep Tibet enslaved. Then we're not doing a really good job. So it's a part of a bigger picture. How do we deal with China? If we can actually in a good way resolve this question, that will have a trickle-down effect for many others, Tibet, Uyghurs, Hong Kong, and the rest. So, it's important to keep a broad perspective on things. We cannot separate these things by saying that Tibet is Tibet, but then we'll deal with China in another way. It's for better or for worse, de facto, Tibet is in China right now, or controlled by China, shall we say. So it's a part of a bigger question.
I'm from Voice of Tibet, Tibetan News Company, and as today is the Tibetan Uprising Day, so what kind of message would you like to give to the Beijing by attending today's Uprising Day?
I believe the most important message conveyed is that the spirit of uprising still prevails. Tibetans are not broken, Tibetans continue in their struggle and will continue because it's the very struggle of preserving own identity, culture, and heritage. And this cannot be destroyed. This cannot be dismissed. And the leaders in Beijing shall always keep it in mind.
So, if I understand correctly, it's what the message to Beijing is, right? So my message would be very simple: just get out.
To the up.
I think the message from the today event is very, very clear. Tibetans have three very strong supports. The first one is their spiritual leadership. That's very, very important. The second is their solid institutions in exile. They have worked very, very hard, and they build something very, very important. And the third, you can find a shared desire to be united in the future. The ones that are in Tibet and the ones that are all over the world. So, my colleagues explained that very, very well. Soviet Empire grow and disappear, and I think that's what is going to happen with this Chinese communist government.
I'm Lobby from Radio Free Asia. My name is Lobby from Radio Free Asia, and I have 3 different questions for each delegations. First, my question for the European Parliament MPs. Will European Parliament appoint special coordinator for Tibetan issues like US did? And for the MPs of Mexico, how would the Mexico support Tibet cause concretely? And MPs for Lithuania, since Lithuania was under the communist regime for a long time, how the current government sympathize the cause of Tibet? Thank you.
To answer the question on the European Union members of Parliament, European Union works democratically, and this decision is within the powers of the executive, namely of the High Representative Mr. Joseph Borrell. So definitely it is our aim as the parliamentarians to have talks with him and to convince him to deliver on this request of ours.
So your question to me was, if I recall correctly, due to our experiences of Soviet occupation, how do we sympathize with the Tibetan people, if I'm correct? I would go even a bit further and say that it's not just sympathy that we feel, but it's kind of a déjà vu. I mentioned that in my speech today, in my address, where, when we hear about what, you're told by the Chinese, their discourse on Tibet, it's China's approach to its right to self-determination and just freedom of religion and conscience. It's the same thing that those are the same things that we used to hear in Lithuania. You could find them in our history textbooks, or you could ask probably Aušra Maldeikienė, who had to live through that. It's the same thing. I mean, we kept being told that we should be grateful that we were liberated, when in fact we were, just forcibly brought into a prison of many nations, as it was used to be called. That we were protected from, the Third Reich. Well, the alternative to that was, being part of a communist dictatorship. So I don't know how that was really a better alternative. That we should be grateful. Even today, we have people in Lithuania say that, well, what about all the things that the Soviets built for us? The dams, the electrical stations, and buildings, and so on and so forth. Should we demolish them as well because we hate our past? No, that's not about it. But the fact that we're constantly being told that we should be grateful for what was done, well, the opportunity to do these things for ourselves was taken away from us. So saying that we should be grateful when that happened, it's trying to force a kind of a Stockholm syndrome on a whole nation. I believe that it's very similar to what's happening with you and the Tibetan people, that you keep being told that you're being liberated from superstition and religious dogma. You're better at democracy and being part of the global world than the Chinese are right now. You could teach them a thing or two. So it's a very interesting dissonance what I see here, and it's very reminiscent, I believe, of what Lithuanians had to go through. So again, it's not just sympathy. Sometimes it's just kind of a feeling of deja vu that's still going on. Is for us, it's our past, and I believe that's one of the motivating factors that allows us to Lithuanians to support Tibet so much, because when we read our past, when we look at what's going on here, we see that it as the present, and that's it's something that shouldn't happen.
As I told you before, the delegation is working, so Mexican foreign policy support openly Tibetan cause. in the moments that is required, and even in discussions in international organizations.
Xi Jinping has just begun his third term as Chinese president. What is your reaction to?
Chinese constitution originally allowed the president of China to be elected only for 2 consecutive terms. This is clear change we see as a sign of very progressive dictatorship, in the sense that no leader shall rule until the death. This is very, very worrying, and very worrying sign for democracy in China.
Well, I agree with what you said. Again, it's a sign of bad things to come, which could lead to better things. What I mean is that obviously this is a consolidation of power, but it's a sign of, first of all, insecurity, because the benefit of democracy is that it's not about particular people, it's about the system and the process. And if you trust that, yes, it might be slower, it might be prone to some mistakes, but it's still about the process and does not depend on particular people being, immoral for the system to work. If you make your system about one person or one particular group of people, that system might, for a time, be very effective, very brutal, very good at consolidating power and maintaining it, but people are mortal, and if they die or make mistakes or make too many enemies, and they are removed, the system itself will have very hard time functioning in the long run. So while I agree with what was said, that it's future in China, at least in the short run, is bleak, and autocratic impulses are strengthening there. In the long run, if that's what the current leadership in Beijing is betting on consolidating power in the hands of one person or his close circle, that is doable. But again, then you're betting on a thing that is definitely finite, and there will always be a question of, well, then what's next? Unless you build a system that of autocratic transition from one dear leader to another, that might work 1 or 2 times. Yeah, that might extend the longevity of the Chinese autocracy, but still, I believe that the future of China is very different from what is being built right now.
Now we'll have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, my name is Lop Sang, and I'm from Tibet Express. My question is, in the past, the United States and Western countries and all the urban countries, they started engaging with China with the hope that China will open up and change and adopt democracy. But looking now at present, all these countries, even for them to sit with China, they have to accept China's condition to have dialogue. So my question is, can we really trust China to have a fair dialogue? Or can having a dialogue with China will lead to any productive result?
The experience coming from my own country, from Czechia, as well as from other European countries, is very negative about this sort of dialogue. Effectively creates not many promised jobs or economic opportunities, rather creates more economic dependence, and has no measurable contribution to democracy in China. So I would very strongly warn against such an approach, because it is rather dangerous for the countries taking it than contributional in any sense.
I mean, as long as it's possible, one should talk to China, but one very important thing to bear in mind is that while you're talking to China, always know that you must be very careful about how you read the answers that you're given, because China is an autocracy. And again, to build on what you've said, China doesn't, especially nowadays, now that it's quickly moving to a more autocratic state. China doesn't do business because it likes business or because it likes whoever China's doing business with. In geopolitics, especially for a country like China, economy, trade, developmental projects, loans, and so on and so forth, they are means of expanding influence and, in a way, to use a metaphor, sinking the hooks into someone and keeping countries and regimes on a leash. So, knowing that, yes, completely stopping dialogue with China, that would, that would bring kind of diplomatic silence, but then very likely China would start talking to the world by other means, which would be even more troublesome. So, yeah, while China is still willing to talk, we can try doing that, but we must always bear in mind what kind of conversation that is and how we should treat the answers that we're given.
Yes, I think it's very difficult to have a transparent relation with China. I think China always acts with a second intention, and I think it's, I said before, the project of China all over the world is neo-colonization. They try to interfere in governments at local level, at national level, and in the Tibetan cause, we hope conversations can come in a honest way. We really want it, we really hope it, but we must be very, very careful with China. I think that's the main conclusion of how our relationship between countries and in a dialogue in the Sino-Tibetan matter, it could be.
Yeah, one more question, please. One more.
How was the meeting with His Holiness?
So we can start, shall I? Very friendly, very interesting, and very enlightening. I must say His Holiness is very healthy, and I found that in a way very intriguing and somehow informal in the sense of approach. I mean, this is not the formal meeting you are used to with religious leader. It's a meeting with real person, with emotions, with love, and with friendship, and that was something we will never forget.
I mean, I personally don't consider myself to be a religious person, but what I really enjoyed and what stuck with me is the fact that, His Holiness is, for lack of a better word, he's a global leader. He's a global influence. He's a religious leader, very well known throughout the world, and yet he manages to keep it so simple. I mean, you see a person who is, for lack of a better expression, really at peace with the world and his surroundings, and it shows and it kind of emanates from him. So this ability to unite in one person, this responsibility, a very difficult lifetime, and this ability to keep things simple, to be simple in a good way, is something quite extraordinary. That's the main lesson that I took away from today's meeting. That
Oneness is a very powerful idea. That's what he shared with us. And everybody in the delegation agrees that our point of view about the world, about politics, about personal relationships change. It was a very, very powerful meeting, a very, very powerful impression. He was very generous, very, very, very kind with the Mexican delegation. We feel so happy, and we confirm why Mexico loves His Holiness.
Thank you, Mr. Nicolas Pexa, Mr. Salvador Caro Cabrera, and Mr. Arunas Valinskas. It has indeed been a very satisfying press meeting, and I thank you, all of you, and the members of Parliament who are present with us today. So before we close this press meeting, I would request my colleague, Mr. Tenzin Lekshe, the Additional Secretary for International Relations and the spokesperson of the Central Tibetan Administration, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you. And to conclude the press meet, the joint press meet, I would like to thank, on behalf of the Department of Information and International Relations of the Central Tibetan Administration, our honored guests, speakers, and the honorable member of Mexican Parliament, Salvador Caro Cabrera, honorable member of European Parliament, Nicolas Pexa, honorable member of Lithuanian Parliament, Mr. Arunas Valinskas, and all the members of the Parliament from Mexico, European Parliament, and Lithuania, and the assistants in the delegation for your presence over here in this press meet, and also on this occasion, a very important occasion of the 64th anniversary of the Tibetan Uprising Day. And your presence here on this occasion, very important historical occasion, means a lot to the Tibetans and the Tibetan people all over the world, which instills greater hope for the just cause of Tibet. And I hope that you will continue to show your solidarities and support, which is not just about the Tibetan issue, but it's a global issue. And I thank you all for your presence once again. And I would like to thank the friends from the media fraternity for your presence here. And I think your presence are more than ever before at this moment. And we would like to thank, and we would like to have the continued support from the media fraternity for the future. Thank you so much, and we'll wrap up over here. Thank you all.